Welcome to Inside Fashion. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and our special guest today is Bill Blass, one of the world's most celebrated designers. Bill Blass is a one-man fashion conglomerate. He designs almost everything, including furs, shoes, perfumes, chocolates, and even an automobile. His designs, the essence of American fashion sophistication, and his 40-year career on New York's 7th Avenue have had a profound effect on the American apparel industry. It's a very special pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you.
How does a high school football player from Fort Wayne, Indiana, grow up to become a celebrated fashion designer on New York's 7th Avenue?
I think it has something to do with coming from Indiana, you know, Barbara Lee, because it isn't that unusual. Norell is from Indiana, Halston. Legendary Mambouche, who was Maine Bacher in those days, was from Indiana. But the one thing I think we did have in common is we had to get the hell out of Indiana.
Well, how old were you when you decided to get out of Indiana and into fashion?
Well, happily, I'm one of those people who knew from an early time what I wanted to do. I think, don't forget, this was the legendary time of the Depression, when for 15 cents on a Saturday afternoon you could go to the movies. You could see Carole Lombard and Dietrich and Garbo and those people, and I knew that somehow or other making clothes for people of that sort was going to be the most exciting life in the world for me. So from that time on, when I was very, very young, I started sketching and sending sketches to New York manufacturers, selling them actually. And then when I was 18, I actually did come here to go to school and eventually to work. 18
years old and ready to conquer New York. How'd you do it?
Well, I went to school, as I say, but I've always sketched, and I sold sketches even as a young lad. There was no trouble at all getting a job on 7th Avenue. In those days, too, 7th Avenue houses, such as the one I have now, employed a whole bevy of designers. There would be 2 or 3 head designers and many assistants. So there was always need and room for additional design staff.
Unlike many other designers, you never worked for a Paris couture house.
My one regret, too, damn it. After I finally did get to Paris during the war, I realized that would be the sensational idea, to come back there and really have some period of working in a design house in Paris. In those days, the French designers loved the idea of having American kids work there.
Do you suppose your work would be different today if you had apprenticed to one of the great Paris fashion designers?
I think that technically it might. I don't think that my basic approach to fashion would have changed so much, because as I go over the sketches that I did even as a youngster, they're still reminiscent of what I'm doing now. The only thing I think that would have been invaluable is the technique, which you learn in a Paris house.
Well, how does your current notion of fashion differ from those teenage dreams in Indiana?
Well, really not wildly. I had a kind of idea that the one thing you wanted to do is make women the most glamorous that you could possibly make them. I knew nothing about the lifestyle, certainly, of the people that I visualized in my sketches of that period, but that was what I attained to. I think that it was just an idea I had in my mind.
Your dreams of designing for Dietrich and Garbo were a very strong influence on you, Bill. Did you ever design for the movies once you yourself became so well known?
No, the funny thing, the only time I ever did it was for a friend of mine, Jean Tierney. She was making a comeback, and she asked me to do her clothes. I've always stayed away from it. I don't even like doing film. I don't even like doing clothes for the stage particularly, because actresses are such a pain in the ass. But nevertheless, it was fun doing the clothes for Tierney, and I've done clothes for Streisand, which was an extraordinary experience because she's so knowledgeable about it. But for the most part, actresses...
What do you mean knowledgeable about it?
She knew instinctively more about fashion than almost anybody I've ever met. She certainly knew about her own body and her own good points. She was an exciting woman to dress.
There are a number of famous women who wear your styles, but who's the typical American woman who buys your clothes?
Well, she's a composite, really, of a lot of... I make a lot of clothes for Mrs. Reagan, and who's this tall, and a lot of clothes for Mrs. Kissinger, who's that tall. And yet, the woman that I sort of keep in mind, not my mannequin that I fit on, mind you, but it's a woman that's a composite of customers from San Francisco to Texas to Detroit to New York. I think it's a mistake to have the image of only one woman in mind. Frankly, it's always been my opinion that one of the problems about women designers is the fact that they do tend to design in their own image. They rarely design anything that they themselves cannot wear. It's the reason, for instance, that a Madame Grey has never changed her style, nor did Chanel.
Well, you do dress a lot of rich and famous women, but how do they differ from the not so rich and not so famous?
Well, mainly the rich have exposure, God knows, to more in the way of clothes and life and atmosphere in general than the average person. Their needs are, quite honestly, different. They go more places. They have more things to do. Today, it's less true than it was once, because most of these so-called very rich women still work. They do something. And I think that probably the biggest influence in clothes in the last decade, the last 10 years, has been in the working woman. What clothes have to do for you is your business, or even if they're charitable business hours.
How has that influenced the way you design?
Well, there's a certain classic quality they must come in, certainly in the clothes that one wears in the daytime. They must go from one season to another. You can retire them, mind you, and then bring them back again.
How many seasons are there?
2, hot, cold.
And what do we do in between?
You make do.
That's what most of us do all the time anyway.
Those are the times that you wear sort of so-called transitional things, that a lightweight chalet dress, blouses, skirts, things of that sort. But really the idea of major seasonal colors or changes in clothes is ridiculous. We've long realized that the white suit probably has replaced the little black dress.
I think a lot of people would be interested to know, what is the price range of your clothes?
Well, they start about $1,500 and go to $6,000 to $7,000. Then,
What
of course,
costs $7,000?
something with some sable on it.
Must be a lot of sable.
Not so much.
Do you sell a lot of those?
Yep. Our $5,000 evening dresses, beaded, embroidered, are among the biggest selling things we have.
Why do they cost so much? Is it the fabric, the labor?
They're hand beaded, and because I refuse to have the clothes made in Hong Kong or Taiwan or some place like that, they're made here, 8th or 9th Avenue. Even my knits are made by Little Women in Ohio and Michigan. I'm an avid believer that we have to have clothes made in this country, Barbara Lee. Therefore, we pay more money. Labor is higher in this city than it is anyplace else. I'm a big supporter of the union, and I think they should be paid more. But the cost of the labor and the cost of the fabrication is what makes them expensive.
Well, high style has always been expensive, so that hasn't changed. Perhaps you'd tell us what has changed since you've been involved in the fashion industry.
Well, the main change is, of course, that in the days when I first started out, all the major houses were owned by manufacturers. The so-called names of Nettie Rosenstein or Hattie Carnegie not indicate that they were, it perhaps indicated that they were designers, but in reality they were not. Hattie Carnegie employed a whole stable of designers, Norell among them. The major change, of course, has been designer ownership in my time, and this has really only happened in the last decade. Previously, it was always the manufacturer who owned the firm. Designers were highly salaried. They had marvelous jobs because you had a 2 or 3 month vacation at one time, and then 2 or 3 months later, at which time the manufacturer was able then to totally change your clothes while you were away.
They encourage you to take a vacation once you handed in your
sketches. The minute
sketches.
the collection was open, out. But then, of course, we became involved in business too. I don't think any designer is instinctively a businessman, but something, certainly in my own case, I had to acquire, I had to learn. But now I find that almost as exciting as the creative clothes.
As I recall, it was along about 1967 that you became the first American fashion designer of women's clothes to branch out into the design of men's clothing. Was there a special circumstance that prompted you to take that step?
Well, actually, there was a woman at the time who's legendary now, named Mildred Custon, who was the president of Bonwit Teller. And when Cardin came to this country to try to sell his menswear, there wasn't a store on Fifth Avenue who was the least bit interested. But Mildred Custon had just become president of New York Bonwits, and she took on Cardin. So when she found that I was interested in doing this, she said, I'll buy the collection sight unseen, based on what she knew of my own personal taste. So immediately she opened a very snazzy boutique. And in those days, it was a fantastic success overnight. People wouldn't even try on the clothes, they just hold them up and say, I'll take it. But it was Mildred really who sort of put the stamp of approval on it.
In your design of men's clothing, what is the look that you're reaching for?
Well, I think that my main concern was, even at that time, don't forget this was the 60s, when we were going through the most extraordinary revolution in menswear that's ever happened in this country, where all sorts of fantasy was being exhibited in menswear, and I was sort of concerned about the fellow who, quite honestly, was over 35. he wanted to look with it, but not ridiculous. So I think I sort of had in mind men of my own image who to a certain extent, wanted to be adventuresome, but not too so. More classic, more traditional.
But not silly.
Now, there was a terribly silly period. You remember, Barbara Lee? Grown men looking like their kids. I mean, adult men looking like their own sons with long sideburns and bell-bottom pants and body jewelry. Oh, my God.
You once said that a man is happiest in what he wears from Friday through Sunday. Does that belief influence the way you design for men?
Well, there's no question that most fellows are happiest in what they put on Friday night. The interesting thing, of course, is now that increasingly there are occupations where you can wear those very sport clothes in your business as well. But I do think essentially the role of clothes is to give yourself pleasure. And we all know that there are certain things you put on in the morning you obviously are going to enjoy the day more because of them. And I think that's one of the major factors. Or experimenting, particularly for women, where they can experiment with a new silhouette or new color. But it is necessary, of course, to have clothes that at certain times don't overly wrinkle, although I love linen to look wrinkled. I think that you should please yourself. Now, mind you, I think there are occasions when you women dress for men, and certainly men dress for women. But essentially, it's the way you feel to yourself makes it right.
Bill, can you take us through the process that takes an original idea and turns it into a finished garment?
Well, I find the things that appeal to me within the realm of themes, either in color or pattern or things of that sort. Once the charts are made up of this fabric purchase, then ideas come to me. I won't actually start the fall collection until probably January or December, but little sketches are made. You know, I make sketches on my table by my bed or on the plane or in the car all the time, little ideas that then I'm transferred to a larger pad when I get to the office and given to my assistants with the swatch of the designated fabric. Often then we do drape, or we find that when an actual garment is made up, it didn't work out well. Fittings take a lot of time. They're important and the thing I like the best.
Why do you like that the best?
Well, that's the time when you really think you're being a genius, and that's rewarding, because if it turns out well, the day turns out well because the fittings have gone well.
You seem to be designing just about everything these days. How do you find the time to still come up with a new line at least twice each year?
Well, that is the least difficult and at the same time the most complicated and competitive, but it's the most stimulating. There is loads of time for that. You make time for the things you really enjoy doing, and of course designing the so-called couture line as well as Blass Sport really is the most stimulating part of my business.
Bill Blass has about 32 or 33 licensees, as I recall. Do you manage to have a hand in every aspect of every design?
Yeah. You know, the public can spot immediately when a sheet or a scarf, no matter what the product is, I say it doesn't look like you. And you really do have to, though I have numerous assistants and a great deal of help, the overall thing has to be my decision and have my stamp of approval.
Obviously, it all started with the dresses, Bill. But if you didn't keep up the dress line, do you think you'd still have all the licensees?
No, I doubt it. Obviously, the couture part of the business is the smallest financially, but it's the umbrella for all the other things. Certainly, it's the thing that attracts the other 32 licensees. Thing that currently excites me about as much as anything is the interest in Japan. We've had our clothes there now for 3 years. And this fall I'll have some 35 or 40 boutiques in Osaka, Tokyo, and Naga, and the rest of the country. I now go there at least once a year, usually twice. I see now the emergence of the American designer on an international scale. That, I think, is the new stimulation. That's why I really don't want any more licensees here. I want to see the business continue to grow in an international way.
With all of your experience, both in fashion and in travel, do you have any suggestions for the rest of us about how to organize a wardrobe for travel that really works?
Well, I'm the biggest believer, if you're going to go any place for any length of time, in taking everything you got. I don't think there's anything that makes a woman...
That's how most of us pack. We want a better way to go about it.
No, it's the only way. Nothing is worse for a gal than to go someplace and realize that she didn't bring that favorite evening dress, and she has the occasion to wear it. And the same thing applies to a guy not taking his dinner jacket if there's a possibility that he may have a very exciting date someplace. So I'm the worst person in the world to advise about packing. I don't pack myself. and I think you take everything.
How about some advice on how to take care of clothes?
Well, one thing, no matter how fond you are of something, don't wear it every day. Clothes need to relax and breathe too. Try not to send clothes to the cleaner if you can help it. If you can spot clean them after you've worn them, something of that sort. Cleaning is devastating on clothes. But essentially just vary them so that you give them a rest and they will hold up longer. Anyway, I don't mind certain clothes looking really quite beat up. My sweaters are all raveled because I have 2 dogs, and I don't mind that at all.
That's very comforting for all of us. And we'll be right back with Bill Blass.
Fashion, the inside story, will return in a moment. We now return to Fashion, the inside story.
This is Inside Fashion. We're talking to Bill Blass. Something I've been wanting to ask you, Bill. If there is a Bill Blass signature and it looks like you, what does it really look like?
Well, I think it's classic. I think it's sort of timeless. I think that it's clean cut. I like to think even that it looks American as opposed to European.
Well, what is that American look that you talk about?
I think that it's lack of embellishment to a certain extent. European designers, probably because they were more influenced by their custom-made department, tend to have too many ideas perhaps on one dress or one coat or one suit. American clothes tend to be simpler, more interested in fabric and line, and this year color.
Are extremely conservative styles going to be the shape of things to come?
I would never venture to predict anything beyond next season.
But you have said that this is not a time of making fashion waves. What did you mean by that, and what will you predict for next season?
Well, I don't think it's a time to make major fashion waves as far as silhouette or things of that are concerned. I think the biggest change will be that the return to the waistline, that clothes will be, even your suits will be nipped again, but probably color, the return of bright, vivid color. We've had so many season after season of dour, sad colors that I think that you come to this spring, you'll see the brightest chrome, yellow, red, purple, blue, green. Americans and the world now, according to Paris's and Italy's current collections are any indication, we'll see a return to vivid color.
Is there anything that you haven't designed yet that you'd care to?
Well, I'd like to get involved in airplane design. I think that most of them are so depressing.
You mean the interiors?
Interior, yes.
What would you do if you had your druthers?
I wouldn't make them shocking pink, mind you, but I think that they could be more attractive.
Have you ever designed for airline stewardesses?
Yes, I did American Airlines for about 10 years. Very, very disappointing experience. First of all, they used the most awful polyester fabric, while we had nifty blazers and shirts and ties for the gals and a variety of raincoats and things. By the time they were reinterpreted in what I considered third-rate fabrics, they lost a lot of their appeal.
But is that of necessity? I can't imagine someone serving food in a silk blouse and a velvet skirt.
No, I guess you're right. They have to. It's pretty much a matter of necessity.
Is it all still fun?
Yes, it is still stimulating. I can't imagine being in any other business. It has always seemed to me that the opportunity to meet interesting, exciting people have come about through this business. I always, as I said earlier, I wanted to go out and meet the customer, and I have, and that's gratifying and fun too. Most of them are my friends. The shows at the Pierre are crowded with pals as well as buyers.
Why don't we take a look at a Bill Blass fashion show at the Pierre Hotel in New York City. Bill, if you had it to do over again, is there anything that you would do differently?
Well, I think that with the exception of after the 3.5 years in the Army, I would have had a year or two apprenticeship in Europe, just to have had a taste of that, to have acquired some of that legendary thing that France has. After all, they invented making clothes in the sense that the first couture houses, such as Worth, did come about from there. I would have liked that at that time, but later it was too late.
Well, what has given you the greatest satisfaction?
Well, I suspect that I'd be very dishonest if I didn't say recognition. There's something very appealing about that, to be recognized and to be known for what you do. That's nice, no matter where you are.
Bill Blass, our very special thanks to you for being with us on Inside Fashion.